All right, so this is the December 15th ESIP Soil Ontology Cluster presentation. We have Stephen Quiring talking with us from Ohio State University about building a national soil moisture data set. So thank you so much for coming to talk with us, and I'm excited to hear what you have to say.
Thank you very much. I'm looking forward today to presenting some work that we've been doing over the last number of years. My background is as a climatologist, and so I'm approaching this question of how do we integrate, synthesize, and homogenize in situ data, often for the purposes of monitoring drought conditions or looking at land-atmosphere interactions, or providing initial conditions if we're trying to simulate runoff or stream flow. And when I began this work, I realized that even though there are national data sets for many other variables in that precipitation and temperature, air quality and other things, there was not much available in terms of soil water content. And so I, as a climatologist, sort of reluctantly stepped into this out of a necessity, and then have spent the last number of years trying to build on and improve this project. What I'm going to talk about today is a project that was funded through the NOAA MAP program. And I'll focus on two objectives, but I'll also talk more broadly about a lot of other things that we're doing. So this project was in collaboration with Trent Ford, who's the state climatologist for Illinois and is now at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. When we started the project, he was at Southern Illinois University. And then this project also had a contribution from USGS, especially around building cyber infrastructure for delivering the gridded soil moisture products that we developed. And I'll not focus so much about the cyber infrastructure, although that's a really important piece, and I can definitely take questions on that. But the things that I want to talk about are how we actually step through this process of acquiring, synthesizing, quality controlling, and blending or combining these disparate data sets to provide national products that we update in near real time. And so there is a fairly involved process that we've gone through. And being an academic, being a professor at Ohio State, I've tried to publish the methods that go along with each component of this. And so this includes things about the quality control of the data. So even though most of these observations from stations are already go through some type of manual or automated quality control, we, to standardize the data, have our own quality control procedure that is completely automated that we apply to each of the data sets that we ingest in nationalsoilmoisture.com. We also have done a lot of work in terms of coming up with ways to try and standardize those measurements. And so since they're made with different sensors, since those sensors have different sensitivities, and since we're trying to put this together into a national picture, we've looked at and compared methods for standardizing the data by calculating anomalies or percentiles. And so most of the maps and most of the products were moving from sort of the unit of measurement, and we're moving from things like soil water content into a soil moisture percentile, so that it is standardized for that location and for that time of year. And this is especially because the focus of this work was on drought monitoring, where we're especially interested in, are we approaching some of those lower soil water contents like the 10th or 5th or 2nd percentile? And we can't look at that in an absolute way. We need to look at it in a relative way. So relative to that location and relative to that time of year, how anomalous are these soil water conditions? Then we've done some work to look at various methods of taking the data that's measured at these often fairly distant locations and estimating soil water content at unsampled locations. So our data product is 4 kilometers over the continental United States. A project that we're working on right now that we just started this year is to drive this data set down to field scale. So here I use 400 meters as kind of what my a target resolution could be. And that will obviously require a lot more input and work, and I can talk about that a little bit at the end. And then we summarize the process by which we developed and evaluated the national maps that are produced on nationalsoilmoisture.com in this Soil Science Society of America paper that came out in 2020. So there's a lot of detail here, but I just want to start by kind of providing the big picture. So how many stations are we actually using in this data set? Well, the answer depends on what time period we're looking at. If you look at nationalsoilmoisture.com today, there were upwards of 2,000 stations that we are aware of and that we are going out every day and collecting data from. Not that we're physically going there, but that we're scraping or ingesting data from. And we are interested in pushing these maps back as far in time as possible. So this shows the number of stations of in situ soil moisture stations in the continental United States that are recording every day from January 1st of 1996 through September of this year. And this little drop off here is not so much that there are stations that have gone away, just that we haven't filled in the most recent part of the record. Part of our data ingest script broke in 2020. And so that's kind of this artifact. But you can see that there's a large change in the number of stations over time. And the black line shows the raw data. The green line shows after we quality control and calculate percentiles, how many stations remain. And so to calculate percentiles, we need a long enough period of record, a stable location at that site. So there's kind of this systematic difference between these. And then the bumps up and down are what happens when we quality control or filter the data. And this spike right here is what happens when one of the major national networks goes offline for a period of time. So the maps that we're producing are from 3 different data sets. We integrate the in situ measurements, satellite remote sensing, which gives us the top few centimeters of soil water content, and then from land surface models like the North American Land Data Assimilation version 2. And so the land surface models that are part of this data assimilation project. And one of the things that we're interested in is determining which stations should be used for generating national maps. And the stations that we want to use are ones that have low measurement error. So they're accurately measuring the soil water content, where the sensor is located, and that they have high spatial representativeness, meaning that their landscape position, their location, their soil type and land cover is such that a measurement at that location also tells you something about what's going on at unsampled locations that surround that site. And so we've used triple co-location, so to compare 3 independent data sets and to calculate the relative anomaly error for each station, and then to report that for different depths. So these are by network. So these are basically mostly Mesonet. Some of them are national networks like SCAN. And then we've reported that for different measurement depths. And so there tends to be higher errors, higher relative anomaly error in the surface measurements that tends to decrease with depth. And there are systematic differences between the networks in terms of some being maybe better situated to not only represent the local conditions, but also a more regional conditions. And overall, based on the assessment that we did in this paper, 95% of the 1,200 plus stations that we looked at had sufficiently low errors and sufficiently high spatial representativeness to be used in this product. So this is one of the ways that we can filter out stations that might just tell us something about hyperlocal conditions. And there's nothing wrong with that, except in this case where we're trying to generalize those to unsampled locations. We want to use stations where that is possible. There are also, of course, some stations where there are issues, where there's sensor drift or sensors that haven't been properly calibrated, or sensors where they have lost contact with the soil for a variety of reasons. And so that's the other way that we can filter this out. But we're not really trying to point fingers at networks that don't do a good job of quality control. We just want to get an accurate set of stations that we can use. Another thing that we did was look at the land cover that is associated with each of those in situ measurements and see if there are any systematic differences. And so if you look at this plot, there's a lot of information here. But if you look at this plot here, there are some that have higher relative anomaly errors than others. And so that tells us, for example, that in cotton and winter wheat, we see higher error than in some of the other land cover types that we looked at. And there are some things that are a function of where these locations are, what type of sensor is being used, and then also something about the systematic differences in soil types between these land covers. So there's a lot of information, but that's one of the ways we can show it. Another way we can show it is by plotting these 1,200 plus stations on a map. And so this shows all of the stations, for example, that report at 5 centimeters or measure at 10 centimeters or in the 20 to 30 centimeter range or 75 to 100 centimeters. And the color coding here, the darker the color, the higher the relative anomaly error, or the less desirable that station is to use in our process of generating a national gridded soil moisture product. And so you can see that there's relatively few of these dark red, and anything that has a color, anything that's above a value of 0.1 or 0.15, these are the two cutoffs that we've used in the past. And so you can see the majority of stations at the majority of depths have a white or light color associated with them, which indicates that they have low error and are useful for our national assessment. So that's one of the first steps, is to quality control the data and identify which stations are useful. A second step is that we want to combine different data sets together. And the in situ network, the number of stations that we have in the United States on a given day varies, but it might be 1,500. And so there's lots of areas that aren't sampled. And so we want to leverage the other estimates of soil water content that are available. And in this paper that one of my PhD students recently published, we looked at what is the best way to combine information to blend or merge a satellite derived product and a model derived soil water content estimate with the in situ measurements. And here we've evaluated in this study We had 4 different soil moisture data sets that we used, and we had 3 different weighting techniques that we tried, a triple co-location based weighting technique, a least squares weighting, and an equal weighting, or what we could also call a simple average of the 3 products to determine which is the best way to do this. And I've just taken out part of the results here. So first of all, we can look at the error in each one of the potential input products to our blending. So NLDAS is the model, SMOS is the satellite. We have a precipitation-based soil water content estimate, and the Krieged in situ measurements of soil moisture. And you can see that there are some differences. This is the error here is assessed based on 125 stations that were held out. So this is an independent estimate of accuracy. And then we blended these 3 of these different products together. So this is the NLDAS, SMOS satellite, and precipitation-based API blended together. And you can see that the box plot, which shows error across these 125 stations, they're almost identical. And so these distributions, using something that's more complicated, like triple co-location, versus something that's very simple, like equally weighting these 3 products, we don't see a statistically significant difference in the accuracy of the maps. So that was a little surprising to the reviewers, and it took a little while to get this paper through, because we had to prove over and over in many different ways that was the case. So at least for these data sets in this region, a simple blending of 3 of these products. So this shows just us blending another 3. This is the stations. So the Krieged in situ measurements of soil moisture, the satellite, and the model. And we can see that these are slightly lower errors than not using the in situ measurements. But again, the take home message in terms of the blending method is that it doesn't matter which of the 2 you use. We can also show this with an example. So here's just a cherry picked day, the 4th of July in 2014. And we can see across our study region, this was just a part of the continental United States focused on the southern US. So this is what the model showed for soil water content. This is what the satellite showed. This is what our precipitation-based estimate showed. This is what our interpolated in situ measurements for soil moisture showed. And if you look at these qualitatively, there are definitely some similarities between them. And then the bottom row shows different ways that we might blend the 4 products at the top to generate a regional picture of soil moisture. And here, qualitatively, you can see that the locations of drier and wetter soils are pretty consistent across all 4 blends. So which of the 3 products are used and which method is used to blend them gives, at least from a visual standpoint, a qualitatively similar response in terms of the regional soil moisture picture. There's also additional detail here that is, I think, kind of interesting. And so here we're looking at error for each of the sites. So we did a jackknife cross-validation where we withheld each of these sites and then estimated the value at each of these sites and then reported the error at each site. And so we're reporting the error in one of our blends. And we're reporting the error just in the interpolated soil moisture itself. And so generally the blend, the little red circle here, the size of it is a little bit smaller than the blue circle. So that says the blend does better than just using a single product. But we also see that the size of the red and blue circles are a function of the size of the gray circle generally. And so the gray circle shows the temporal stability index at each site. And the temporal stability index is a measure of the variability and representativeness of that site And so a small circle says that this site is very representative of the larger region and is very temporally stable. And sites that have large gray circles are ones where they are not representative necessarily of the larger region and have they are not temporally stable. And so this shows that air varies spatially. There's some spatial structure to it, and that spatial structure is influenced by the underlying soil conditions and land cover conditions that affect how representative a site might be of the larger region. So anyway, there's a ton there. And at this time of day, I won't belabor that point too much, but I'm happy to answer questions. So as a result of all this work, we can put out maps, and we do put out maps that are updated every day. The maps include modeled data. So we show the NLDAS2 NOAA model as percentiles. We show the SMAP level 3. So this is the surface soil water content expressed as percentiles. This is color coded based on the US Drought Monitor drought categories. So that's why it has this nonlinear scale here. And then we have our station-based regression, kriging, interpolation. So this is only using in situ soil moisture and then other ancillary variables that we can use to interpolate precipitation at unmeasured stations. And the variables that are used are precipitation and a soil characteristics, a soil texture variable. And then in the bottom left-hand corner is the blend based on simple average. So adding these three together gives you this map down here. So how good are these maps? One of the ways that we've quantified uncertainty is by looking at the differences. How similar or different are the input maps that are given here? So one of the things that we can do is at every grid cell, generate a difference map that says, well, on this map, this location was the 2nd percentile, and on this map, it was the 20th percentile. And so that gives us how close or far apart these are. And if we average those differences over time, so we've done this for a whole year. In this case, this is showing the 5-centimeter data and then plotting that. So here, green is good. Green means that there's a lot less uncertainty, or there's a lot more coherence or consistency between the different products that are used in the blend. And the oranges and reds are indicating that there's greater uncertainty, that, let's say, the in situ measurements are consistently wetter or drier than the satellite or the model. And the yellow is the intermediate. So we could play around with the color scaling here, but in general, there is some spatial coherence to where we see greater amounts of uncertainty and less uncertainty. And that's in part driven by the land cover, and it's in part driven by the hydroclimatology, the precipitation conditions, and by the soils. And so some of this structure is related to individual stations, which may not be very representative. And so they often look different than the model or the satellite. And there are patterns here related to where SMAP does better and worse in terms of estimating soil water content. And then there's also some topographic related effects, especially in the Western United States. So how do people use these data? How do we use these data? We use these data for things like crop yield modeling, for predicting, for making S2S predictions of temperature and precipitation. So that's seasonal to sub-seasonal. And soil moisture has some predictability, especially for, or is a source of predictability, especially for extreme temperatures. We've used it for initializing our stream flow simulations. So this is from a different PhD student who is using The same setup as the national water model, and looking at how initializing the model with different data sets, like the ones that I showed, result in different performance. And then an area that I work, which is totally different than I ever expected, is on predicting power outages. And it turns out that soil moisture is a significant source of skill for predicting power outages, because trees and their stability is a function of soil water content, and the utility poles themselves also can be blown over if soils are saturated. And there tends to be this kind of bimodal distribution. So when soils are really dry, trees tend to be stressed and are more likely to snap or lose branches. When soils are wet, trees are more likely to uproot, and both those things are associated with increased numbers of power outages. Where we're headed next. So the national maps are calculated kind of irrespective of land cover. And so we have been working with the US Forest Service to try and find additional stations in forest environments and evaluate the performance of these products in forests and rangelands, and determine whether we need to come up with new or different blending approaches. So for example, there's some theoretical reasons why NASA SMAP may not be very good in forests. When vegetation water content is high, that inhibits the ability of the radiometer to sense water in the soil. And so we may want to weight, for example, the model or the in situ higher than what SMAP is in forests. We're continuing to evaluate and improve the uncertainty quantification products, and look at how the uncertainty in these national maps varies as a function of the number of stations, so station density, station representativeness, and other factors, and then to deploy the full suite of our UQ products on nationalsoilmoisture.com. We've been working on soil moisture based flash drought early warning, and this is a project that was funded by NIDIS. We have a proposal pending with NASA that hopefully they will be interested in supporting us. So when we have a good estimate of soil moisture conditions, that means we can provide better predictions of where flash drought is likely to occur. And so we're working on rolling that out both nationally and globally. And then I have a new project funded by USDA through the FACT program that is on developing high resolution soil moisture and ET products for the continental United States at what I'm calling Farmscale, but approximately 400 meters. The ultimate resolution that we get to is a function of how accurately we can do this. And we're looking at machine learning and deep learning approaches to develop these data sets. So it would be taking nationalsoilmoisture.com and optimizing it for agricultural locations and driving down the resolution to as fine a resolution as we can get. So I'll stop there and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. It was a great presentation, really interesting. So I wanted to take any clarifying questions on record, and then we'll turn off the record and we'll transition to an open discussion. So does anyone have any clarifying questions before we close the record? Going to wait a beat here. All right, hearing none, I'm going to stop recording, and then we can move to more free range discussions.